months for virtually everything that we do has been to have many plans for each problem or situation, and then you adapt when reality becomes reality. This is no different. There are many variables, many unknowns. Obviously, the stakes are large, and we have plans for most of the variables, including the ones that may come out in tonight's meeting. We will go through these slides. We'll provide greater detail if there are any questions as we progress through the information. If one has a question, like I said, please feel encouraged to use the text feature, or there will be plenty of opportunity at the end of the slides once all the information has been detailed. So we have the initial state aid runs, but things have certainly changed and continue to change since these numbers were originally shared with schools. It's been clearly communicated that an anticipated deficit of over $13 billion is possible. And Governor Cuomo has repeatedly called on the federal government to close this deficit with federal stimulus monies. The closing of this gap is essential for the continued operations of schools to continue in an effective manner. And without it, it would be devastating. So the difficulties continue with the numerous variables that are inherently present when developing a budget, and they're exacerbated with the current conditions coupled with the new model of reviewing state expenditures and revenue to determine what the actual funding will be. In simple terms, we will receive the proposed funding amount on or about May 15th from the state. This may come at the same time as the federal funding or any sort of decision in that regard, or it may not. And so this brings us to the first bullet. What will the actual state aid amount for our district ultimately turn out to be? We could get the numbers this spring, develop a budget, and then in January have a whole new number, which will be less, and we would then need a plan for how to close that ultimate gap. We have those plans, and depending on the level of mid-year cuts, coincides with the level of programming impact. And this continues with the fact that this is not a concern for just this year, but for the next several years, and we'll get more into that in just a few moments. Before we get into the numbers and where we are with the current mindset, I just wanted to provide the timeline based on the recently released directives from Governor Cuomo, all culminating with the ballots being due to district office, to the district clerk by 5 p.m. on June 9th. So it's a very unique model of voting, and it will all be conducted through absentee ballots. And once again, those ballots are due back to the district on June 9th. Mr. Lenz, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's the critical piece to stress, that June 9th at 5 p.m. is absolutely the deadline. It doesn't work a general election where if you go vote in November, for example, via absentee, they have a week to collect those absentees. We do not operate that way. They didn't change the law in that way, and so absentees are still due on the day of voting by 5 p.m.
Perfect. Thank you.
And actually, let me just stress, so a postmark date will not work for us. It has to be in our hands by 5 p.m. that day.
Correct. And we have the process in place, like all school districts across New York State will be mailing the ballots out. Inside that envelope will be the ballot, as well as a postage paid return envelope for one to complete the ballot and then send it back to the district. So this next slide, this gives us some perspective of the important numbers for tonight's discussion. And let's start out with this current school year's budget of $75,160,916. And just to recap that, in order to fund that, or in order to balance that budget, the board authorized $902,800 last year, and that resulted in a tax levy increase of 0.89%. Earlier in the spring, we presented a rollover budget, and that was in the pre-COVID-19 era. And that was our jumping off point, as you may recall, $75,640,223. And we were prioritizing budgetary implications for continuing to expand the learning opportunities and programs for our students. We were looking at the current expenditures and what could be refined and fine-tuned to get the greatest return on investment. Clearly, things have changed, and we worked with our administrative team and other stakeholders to look at all possible angles to continue the top priorities of current class sizes, electives, etc. As a result of our current model budget that we're working off of this evening, one could argue best case scenario, if factoring in state and federal funding, closing the anticipated gap, is $75,509,671. This represents a 0.46% increase over the current year's budget, over the 2019-2020 budget. And we'll explain how we got to that point in greater detail, and certainly in even greater detail if interested. But we want to show a few more slides to provide even a more detailed overview of the current state of the budget development. So, Mr. Lenz, do you want to provide an overview of revenue sources for our school district, just as a review?
So, as Mr. Rydell indicated, state aid is really a largely unknown entity as we build this budget this year, and still really remains that way. The governor has indicated that, that 20% change in state aid is still a possibility. But I think it's important just to have perspective of what makes up our revenues as a school district and how we balance the budget each year. So the numbers on the left side of the hash mark is the current percentages, and then on the right-hand side, so if we just pay attention to the state aid, the 58.4% number represents this year's revenue, and then the 57.1% of revenue represents next year. So if we just kind of go through those, I think there's two important points to highlight, and that is that state aid, as you can see, is going down as part of a percentage of revenue, and we certainly know that the budget is not going down. So how is that being balanced? It's significantly being balanced by fund balance in this budgeting process. And what does that number represent? As Mr. Rydell indicated, the $902,000 was what we allocated this year. This upcoming budget right now is at $1.7 million as an allocation in order to balance the budget. And we'll explain that in a little bit of a greater detail, but I think it's just important to recognize that 2/3 of our revenue is state aid. And so, because some of those other categories, that other 1.5%, some of that would be like Medicaid. It also represents interest. And of course, we know that interest is going down too. So that's why I see that slight change.
Excellent. Thank you. So this slide we took from the New York State Council of School Superintendents presentation that they sent out to all school districts. It really resonated with us as a way to depict the forecast of the multi-year impact on economy and subsequently schools and school funding. So on this slide, you'll see the economic impact of the recession that followed 9/11. You'll also see the Great Recession from 2007 to 2010 and the forecasted devastating impact that will result from COVID-19 and its impact on the economy. Mr. Lenz, did you want to expand on this slide a little?
Yeah, so I think the other thing that is important for everyone to recognize is really just that middle section. That aqua colored graph. That was the most recent recession that we all are familiar with, and probably are very familiar with, the gap elimination adjustment that resulted from that recession. So initially, schools actually were kind of held harmless through some additional federal funding that initially occurred, and then there was some job bill money that also came into play. But then the gap elimination adjustment came in, to balance the state's budget over a several-year period. In fact, it really took almost 10 years. Last year was the first year that they fully funded the gap elimination adjustment, removing that from every school district's budget state aid run. So I just think that this can be a very lasting impact, and certainly we're concerned about even the immediate impact, but it will be something that potentially can go on for a few years to come.
Excellent. And why don't you take this slide as well?
Sure. So this is really just taking that initial graph and turning it into, just a projection on what the state's revenue looks like, and kind of just further supports what I was just saying. As you can see, what they're projecting as a general fund surplus or deficit, that red line that's going across. So, the current general fund money that they're expecting to receive this, year is $79 billion. But then you can see next year they're anticipating it's going to be 70 billion, and then go down some more. And so even a few years out, the revenue coming into the state, they do not anticipate to be at the current level. So I think that's the same concept with that gap elimination adjustment, and shows you how it takes a period of time for the state to rebound as far as economically. So it's just something that we're going to have to be very cognizant of as we're looking at this budget and future budgets. So
okay, thank you. And so, like Mr. Lenz is saying, it's not a one and done. It's not over this year. But again, our tier one budget, the things that we did look at, things that we were able to cut, we kept the high priorities of the Board of Education and of our learning community. And Mr. Pantaleone, you want to run through this slide of what's maintained in the budget, as it stands right here with the tier one model?
Sure. So with the proposed budget, we're looking to maintain current program of summer, before and after school, maintain all current staffing, as well as maintain our current electives, our extracurriculars, and continue our character education and social emotional learning programs, as well as our initiatives with instructional technology, specifically with our increasing our Chromebook student ratio to get closer to 1-to-1, as well as our professional development and instructional technology programs that we have currently in the schools.
So just to accentuate what this slide is really indicating is that the tier one model, while there were certainly cuts, and that's how we were able to get to the number we are right here at tier one, it maintains all of the programming that we currently have. So anything that's included in that expanded school day, expanded school year concept, and the electives and the extracurriculars, that all make the educational experience for our students. So those are maintained in this. So we, did recognize that we had to make cuts in order to get this level of funding needs, and one that can be further reviewed based on the perspective and direction from the Board of Education, as we continue these workshops. One area that we do want to focus on and to provide insight to the board, and if there are viewers to this presentation, is that like all aspects of society, there have been effects to our district's financial picture based on the pandemic and the closing of schools. Mr. Lenz, why don't you take this and explain these components?
Yeah, so one of the first factors is certainly transportation. As the board is aware, we've been closed, and so therefore, the buses haven't been running. And so since the way that the contract is written with our transportation company, they bill us based on the runs in which they complete. So at this time, we have not been paying them, since our closure on March 13th. However, so while you can certainly understand that that's going to actually produce some fund balance, because in this budget that we're currently in, it was certainly planned that we were going to pay them for all of those runs for this entire school year. And now that that isn't occurring, that's producing fund balance, but it's not dollar for dollar, because we receive aid on that expense. So in the transportation example, we receive nearly 70% aid on those runs. And with that said, we're not going to receive that aid next year, because the aid drives our expense-based aid for the following school year. So since those expenses are not happening right now, we are not going to receive that aid in next year. And so that's one of the reasons why there's additional fund balance being allocated in this budget, is to balance that lack of transportation aid that we're going to receive. It also is to balance some BOCES aid that we're not going to receive, because those expenses didn't happen either, and that's another expense-based aid. Those are the two largest categories as far as that scenario is concerned. But then there's also another thing to recognize is that we had staffing in, all throughout our closure. For the first few weeks, we were running on a very essential staff based on the governor's clarification of essential at that time. And because of that, we had a group of staff coming in and paying them at time and a half, given the contractual obligation that we had. So that's just another impact to the budget as far as funding, because nobody would have planned on doing that for a few weeks in our current budget. The other is just having that staff in and completing the disinfecting for the rest of the staff that were deemed essential and were in the buildings during that time, such as our food program. And we've spent between $40,000 and $50,000 on additional cleaning supplies. We continue to purchase PPE equipment such as masks, gloves, and it's all of those things that are still happening and will certainly happen into next year, and we're trying to be cognizant of that in the budget as well. And then the other is that as we look at staffing, even currently we have an unemployment bill for some of our substitutes that were not continuing to get work throughout this process. So that's another bill that's happening, certainly, again, unplanned. So it's just that we're going to have to be cognizant of that as we move forward into next year. And the governor talks about mid-year cuts, because that's going to reduce some of that cut that we're going to receive. So ultimately, if somebody were to lose a position, there's certainly a savings there, but then we are going to have to pay unemployment those costs as well. And then the extended impact that we've referenced based on a couple of these other slides, this is going to be a long-term process that we need to be cognizant of as we're building this budget, as well as next year, and so on and so forth. I know we only build one budget at a time, but we really need to be cognizant of the long term. And I believe the fund balance allocation that we're proposing does do that, because some of this is based on one-time impacts, going back to transportation and BOCES aid as the example.
So that brings us to the next slide. And what does this mean? Best case scenario, I stress that, best case scenario, funding is in place from the state and federal government, maintaining the current programs, not simply rolling over every item or portion of the budget. That's important to stress, but the budget that allows us to maintain all of the expanded school day and expanded school year concepts, our program during the school day, that we've come to expect for our students, and also improving our technology resources. And that became even more evident as a need in the current situation that all schools are in. And really providing the same educational experience for our students. And this all comes as a result of the hard work from really the entire administrative team, Mr. Lenz, Ms. Rutt, the entire business office. And the current point to drive the discussions from this point forward is, with all this in place, is a 1.75% tax levy increase with a $1.7 million allocation of fund balance. This is not the final number. We wanted to get to a point for tier one so the board can then make decisions and give us some direction as to where they want things to land. This is not ideal. This is far from ideal, but it's what it took and will take to maintain contingent on what that third look back at the midpoint of the year will look like. So this brings us to the central points of discussion that we'd like to have tonight. What are the thoughts on the budget-to-budget differential? What's the consensus on where we need to be with the tax levy, the use of fund balance, further reductions in the budget? These are the items we need from the board as we move forward. And like I said, we have plans for most of the levels of possibilities that may come up. And we know there's no perfect model during this very difficult time with everyone, for everyone. But, this is the discussion we need to have at this point. So what I'll do is I'll discontinue the sharing of the screen, and we can go back to our model. And is everyone back seeing the different, everyone else that's in the meeting? Yes. All right. So let's see, we have quite a few texts here, so I will go up. So Debbie asks, when are they being mailed out? So we have, with very great precision, worked out a timeline for each of these steps. Mr. Lenz, you want to go through some of the finite, working back from when they're being mailed out?
Yeah, so ultimately the goal is to get them mailed after the day after Memorial Day, that Tuesday, May 26th is the goal. The board, as you're aware, we have another budget workshop on the 18th. Once we have that information from the board, actually we're going to take that information, while it's not official, get the ballots ready so that we can have those processed immediately after the board adopts the budget, to be moving us forward, so that way those can get printed and then be able to actually be mailed on the 26th, because it's a very short window to then get those back by June 9th for the taxpayers, because we all know that even with mailing them at that point, it's a couple days in the mail before they land in people's homes. Which also drives home why we set the budget hearing date for May 27th this year, just so that way people can have that fully informed information as they receive those ballots in the mail following that day. And then just moving on, I see Tanya, is asking the question about what cuts did this proposal include? So as you can see, there's about $131,000 change from the original rollover budget. Much of this really represents some of the additional conference funds that folks attend, as far as our administrators, our teachers, and while that certainly has an impact, because we do want people to constantly be learning. That is one of the areas that we focused on. Went through some of the supply lines and focused on those, as well as equipment lines, and focused on that. So that's where really much of the initial things came from, and that's where we felt it was best to focus before impacting anything that directly impacts student instruction. And then I see where Judy just asked the question, can people drop ballots off to Tompkins Street? Yes, they can. They don't have to mail them back, especially if they get really close to the date. That would certainly be an option for them to do so.
But we stress that must be delivered in the board clerk's hands by 5 p.m. on June 9th. So just to get back to what Mr. Lenz was saying about, what was cut, literally every line, the top priority is the instructional model, and then it's providing and allowing for the schools to be the necessary hub in any community. And that's where those priorities came in, which was how can we maintain programs and still reduce as much as possible. And that's where we are. So now that's why we're calling this tier 1. And, from, next steps would be, what numbers does the board want us to arrive at? Because we have those plans, and we did so strategically, if I do say so myself. Yes, I'll get to you, Joan, but we have Flo. Asked the question, who are getting these ballots?
So there's we as you know have registered voting, and so it's all those that are registered, which at this time I believe is, if I remember the number right, it's 9,986 individuals that are registered to vote. So that's the number of ballots that we're mailing out. And right now, it's also my understanding, because we won't have a registration process as we typically would, individuals still do have the ability to register through the DMV. And so if that happens, then they would also get a ballot at this time.
All right. Joan? Joan, did you have a question?
I'm having a hard time with this mouse thing. I know some of the wages have to be increased contractually. Mm-hmm. Some of the stipend wages, however, do not. Can we not give increases to those wages at this time?
Well, right now we have an expiring collective bargaining agreement with the Teachers Association. So that would be subject to negotiations. I would tell you that it's a relatively small increase each year, and it's a relatively small overall number. When I say relative, I mean relative to the size of operating costs for a school district. But that being said, everything is subject, to the current situation.
Stipends automatically get an increase through their bargaining agreement, through their contract.
Correct.
Correct. What about the other stipends that we approve every year?
No.
That are July. They're not covered by a bargaining.
There's no contractual language that I'm aware of that has any of those stipends receiving an automatic increase.
Can they then be held at their current rate instead of increasing them? That be an option?
Ultimately, the board approves any of the raises or any change to a stipend.
Right. So I and my statement would be that as a board, I think if that was a decision that the board wanted to proceed with, then yes, that could be an option.
Okay, thanks.
No, good questions. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Flo has a question. Oh.
Does Flo have a question? Okay.
Yeah, I do. I have a question, and it has to do with summer school and everything you do around summer school. I know our next due date is May 15th, and then I heard June 6th. Now, when we do a budget, everything is going to be calculated for summer school, even though all of this is like on hold. So, I mean, I know we're talking a nice venue of what we have for summer school and the extra things that we do and stuff. How do we, and I know it's so hard, and thank you for everything you're doing, but I'm thinking, okay, May 15th, they're going to say no. June 6th, they're going to say, okay, but no schools, no schools till September. But now we're going to fund a budget that's going to have all the summer school stuff in.
Correct.
And I know, and I'm not saying this to be vicious or vindictive or whatever, but you're talking a pretty penny, especially that you want to take 1.7 million out of fund balance to fund this, and it's still going to be close to a 2% increase. And believe me, I'm saying I know what we're going through now. I'm not naive,
Well, no, and it's a great question, Flo, and just a couple of important points here. Correct. This is a very unique situation, and we need to prepare for things that we can't be certain will occur. But I also want to be prepared and ready to be able to react to whatever we can do. And like I said before, we have multiple models for every different scenario. We live by an if-then model. If the governor says we can do this, then this is how we'll get this done. I can't begin to express the amount of work that goes into from all of our entire team to come up with these plans of what it could look like. So if you want to talk about summer school, I'm a very big proponent of summer school. And since I first came here, I've tried to figure out every way to expand those learning opportunities, because I believe that if you have the right learning model, learning can and should happen year round to further enrich and assist students. That being said, our students, as a result of this closing, have been impacted tremendously in the realm of education, among multiple other aspects. And this year, more than ever, absolutely, I'm going to look for every possible way I can to make sure that we have summer opportunities for our students. And I also did make it a priority for our administrative team to keep that in until pretty deep into the tiers of, each tier represents more and more things cut. And one of the priorities was maintaining summer school for that very reason, and help, minimize regression, and in some cases, maybe help with enrichment for our students. So yes, I am a big proponent of summer school, and the return on investment is there. And it impacts a lot of students for multiple reasons. So, yeah.
I agree. Please remember what I said.
I get what you're saying. It's a great question.
what you guys are going through, the whole staff that's still there doing their work, and you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. You don't know if we get a second wave and we're going to be closed but then now we're going to have a budget out there that you're going to have almost 2% and 1.7. I'm just saying the first scenario, tier 1. Okay. I'm just saying tier 1. And then this is what the people have to pay taxes on. And this is what, and then the governor says, nope, you're not getting that money, which, I don't know. But like I said, we're working, so it's a work in progress. So
it's just a work in progress. This is where we're jumping off from, where we did the work to get to that point where we could then have the conversation. Then, in regards to summer school, I've always told the board, you ask the question, I'll give you the answer, and in the roundabout way, just ask me the question. I'll tell you, if the governor tells us that we're not coming back in summer school, then what I would say is I would like to have the plan in place that at the very minimum, and this is not perfect, but it's when you compare this model to nothing, it certainly is better. If we have to continue virtual learning in the summer, again, pales in comparison to the effectiveness and efficacy of traditional, if you will, model, instructional model, learning model, then I want to be in position to be able to afford that to our students, because again, that will be a long time of no new instruction, no learning, no, filling gaps that exist. So yeah, we have a 4-tiered plan for what summer school could look like, all the way from virtual learning to a blended learning. And it's like a puzzle. I then imagine, what does it look like if Governor Cuomo says that we can only have 7 students in a classroom at any given time, and we have to do all these social distancing things? Okay, we look at all the entrances and exits. We look at all the hallways. We look at classrooms. We look at an A-B schedule where it's a blended learning model. These are the things that we're preparing for, and those things in summer substance come at an expense, right? You have to compensate your professionals to do that job.
Correct. Okay, so Friday the 15th, we should know something, and we'll get ready for our next budget meeting next Monday.
They tell us the 15th, but they say the 15th. We'll see what happens on the 15th.
The 15th, and then June 6th, and then, I don't know. I don't
know either, but we have to be prepared for whatever those decisions are. We have to be prepared and come up with those models.
Correct. And I thank you. I thank you all for doing, and your staff and the administration for everything you've done for our district, because this is very trying times.
It is. It's for our students, for their parents, and
everybody.
So, I saw a couple of messages come in. I'm sorry.
All right, I'm done.
Oh, were you saying something?
I was just going to jump to the next question that Brian had posed. Of how much fund balance was going to be left after the 1.7. So right now in our undesignated fund balance, there's $4.5 million. However, it's also important to note that, as Mike indicated, we allocated $900,000 this year. Of course, based on this year and based on not having that full year, we certainly will have that fund balance to roll into next year. So that 902,000, I can comfortably say at this point in time will exist to roll into next year. So then at that point, it's really talking about finding that 770. And really that will come from, at this time, not paying for those transportation costs. But that's really taking much of that and supplementing, taking that money that didn't spend, but supplementing because we're not going to get it in state aid. So it's, kind of filling that gap.
Okay.
So one-time source of money, filling a one-time gap, hopefully, is really the expectation. And then Joan, could Cuomo give us zero aid at his look-back periods? Ultimately it's up to the individual in control of the budget and him as far as what they're going to potentially reduce this as far as aid. At each of those look back periods, we just went through the first one of April 30th, waiting for that result. They say May 15th. And the next question mark exists on June 30th. And then the following look back period is, around the start of the new year. So Christmas time, January 1st kind of thing. There's the next look back period. And at that time, he has the ability to adjust the aid based on a 1% gap in between revenue and expenses. So I don't know if it would be zero, but at the same time, he's put out the number of 20% as far as a reduction. And that's where, as far as a 20%, just looking at flat dollars based on our foundation aid, that would be about a $6.4 million change at a 20%. But that's who knows what the real outcome is until we see that information.
And that's why, and I'll take the blame or whatever for that. I felt no reason to come out and really show what a $6.5 million cut would look like to our budget, because it would basically be just cutting everything other than absolute, even beyond absolute essential programming. So it would just be devastating. So, we have to see where that gap gets filled by federal monies, et cetera. So, getting back to the texts that are coming in, if we continue virtual in summer, are we going to continue with enrichment programs? And the answer to that is maybe. It really depends on what the model will allow us to do. If it's 100% virtual, then I would like to have some components being enrichment activities. For example, some of the stream activities, coding. There are many things that the students could be doing at home, but even some of our music program with using smart music, great technology that could be used. But ultimately, our top priority is the academic piece, and that's why we would have to look at where are our needs, what are our numbers for that, and staff accordingly. So, can we have a copy of the proposed budget next time? Yes, this meeting, we want some feedback from the board as to where you want, things to land, because we threw a lot of numbers at you tonight, but the two major numbers are 1.7 million and 1.75%. And we get it. It's an anomaly of a year, and there's some story to tell regarding the fund balance piece, but nonetheless, there are decisions to be made, and we could give proposals on any one of those. And off to Joan's question, can we also look at the tiers? You absolutely can, but we need to know where we're looking at ending up with fund balance and the percentages, because that affects what programs are being cut. Understand that each 1% of the tax levy represents about $286,000. Is that about right, Joe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct.
So if you went from a 1.75 and you wanted to take 1% off of that tax levy, it's important to understand that that's 286,000, and what does it take to get 286,000? And same concept with the fund balance piece. And Ms. Lash, okay, just a statement, yeah. So, any feedback, insight on what we presented, on really anything?
I guess I'll just ask, where does the board stand with regard to tax levy versus, what kind of increase? None of us want to see an increase. Let's be perfectly honest. It's going to impact each and every one of us, right? But I think we need to give them some sort of marching orders before the next meeting as to what are we willing to go, what are we not willing to exceed. Joan,
I can't type fast enough on this thing.
That's okay.
Talk a heck of a lot faster. I can't really tell anything without seeing a budget. Like, I don't know how far you've cut into equipment for the buildings, not for the students. I believe that we still need to get the computers on a rotating basis for the students. But like the office equipment stuff, some of the equipment for some of the buildings, maintenance is going to kill me for this one. But maintenance, I mean, during the good years, you get the stuff that you don't really need. But when money gets tight, you have to tighten your belt too, just like we do at home. So cut back on some of the equipment that's you want, but you don't really need. Also, some of the, like I said before, and this isn't going to get me too well liked, but some of the salaries that you can not give increases to. See, my mouth opens before the brain kicks in, but some of that stuff you can save money on, and like everyone else, when you are situated like this where things are really, really bad, there are things you have to do that you don't want to do, but you have to do to get. And with those two things right there, you could probably get 200,000.
So I just want to have a little discussion about that, Joan. And certainly I understand exactly what you're saying and don't disagree. And if you asked Don, he would tell you that basically I told him the exact same thing that just came out of your mouth, and that you were just saying about you're not going to be able to get what you want. And that's what I've been saying as well. It's just the part that is certainly strange as we develop this budget this year is it's with so much uncertainty around state aid, which is drastically different than, history. So we have to be mindful of those look back periods that you reference, because we could have some mid-year impacts. And so I guess what I really caution is that how deep we go on certain lines as far as making cutbacks, because there are going to be things that we need to be able to cut mid-year, because while we're certainly not going to want to have those discussions now, really, or ever, but if we have nothing that we can look at in the middle of the budget process, in December, it's going to inherently go in the direction of personnel rather than looking at an equipment line, for an example, since that was the one you brought up. I'm just putting that out there. It's something that we need to be mindful of in this budget scenario, that normally that would be my go-to right off the bat as well, to just fully slice some of those things, because we at least know our state aid.
Quite honest with you, that 1.7 fund balance scares me a lot.
So I think that's another important thing that, so I'm going to use transportation as the example, because that's the largest one. Right now, I anticipate with not paying for transportation costs throughout this remainder of the year is probably going to yield, probably close to almost $800,000 in fund balance. However, it comes at a cost of at least probably between $500,000 and $650,000 of state aid, depending on what those runs would have looked like. So it's really supplanting those funds that have been made available by not paying that expense and making it so we can function next year with our traditional transportation program. And so that fund balance is coming from a one-time source being used on a one-time expense, because once we go through a normal school cycle or a school calendar, that state aid will flow, at least for that line, in a traditional way. So, instead of having that reduced number for next year, we'll go back to having more of a normal state aid number as far as transportation based on, what is it, 21, 22 school year.
Now, what aids are you going to have to wait 2 years to get? Like, I know there's some aids that you get every year, but then there's some that you have to wait a year to get. And we're going to be hurting when we don't get the state aid that we're missing this year, but we won't get it this year. Well, we won't get it next year.
Right. So the best example of that, that's really the transportation that I'm referring to. It's not the only one, but it's the big one. And that's where we're not making that expense right now, because we're not having that expense. The aid isn't going to flow on that expense next year. So we're losing that money next year and going to have the full expense next year. So, if we spend $3 million on transportation, if that's the number, then that's going to be our expense next year. And we're not going to get, let's call it $2 million in state aid. That number is not coming. We're going to get approximately, let's say, 1.5 million in state aid. I'm not saying these are the exact numbers, but conceptually it's right. So that's the gap that we're filling is between that 1.5 million that we're actually going to get next year versus the 2 million that we would traditionally get. And that's where much of that fund balance is being allocated. So we can go back to a more normal, I would say, allocation of fund balance that following year, of course, pending what the financial or economic outlook looks like. I caution against some of these things because I have to believe that our financial picture is not going to just be impacted this upcoming year. It's going to be a long-term impact based on some of the things that we're seeing, as we shared tonight with that NISCUS example of what the curve looks like on that slide. So it's being cognizant of next year as well as the following, because the other thing I'll use is the example that I think it's important is, our tax levy limit is fully calculated based on consumer price index, and consumer price index is fully dependent on the sale of goods in our economy. So, one of the major driving factors is oil. Oil has went down to being worth nothing in comparison to where it was at. Just go to the gas pump and you can see the difference in the price of oil. So it's important to recognize that, because next year our tax levy limit is going to be near nothing, and that's going to be true, of course, for all the districts across the state, because CPI is going to be near nothing. Again, going back to just the current pricing of goods versus the past. So that's going to be one of the drivers. The other is that because the stock market is not in great shape, that means that our retirement systems are not going to be receiving the funding that they anticipate. So once that happens, a bad year gets into the mix, and that bad year stays on their books for 5 years while they're doing their actuarial valuations. What does that mean? That means that as school districts and local townships and counties are going to have to fund those retirement systems to keep them at close to or near 100% funding. So our TRS and ERS rates are going to go up in the future based on the current economics. So it's just being cognizant of all of those things that are going to impact our future budgets as well. So this isn't the one bad year. It's going to be multiple based on those current economic items.
All right. Thank you for the comprehensive lens. Are we going to do a hiring freeze at this time that's from Linda Van Horn? By that, do you mean, are we filling the positions? Are we not filling the positions that come up through attrition? Or could come up through attrition? Is that the question? Is that the question, Linda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's hard because I'm trying to click on. Okay.
I should have just answered it, but I didn't want to answer the wrong question.
No, I just was wondering, because we did have a lot of people who have put in for retirement, and if all we're going to be doing is virtual, I mean, maybe there would be a way of spreading our students out. Like if a class has 30, like if class has 20 students normally, and now you're going to have, you can put a class of 30 in because they're doing it virtually anyhow. It's not like, it's still hard and difficult, and I understand that, but I was just wondering if there was a way we could just hold down on the hiring of everything, including any custodial or clerical or anything, because, that would save us some money anyhow, I believe.
Correct. And then you have to balance that out with at what expense.
Right.
Certainly, I would continue to have very lengthy conversations with anyone that would propose that we're going to go virtual indefinitely, and that we're in a virtual model is going to be the new model for education, despite what any politician may say about reimagining education. I'm saying let's imagine how we can improve education and not reimagine it. So all that being said, no, I would not look to build a model that would say how can we allocate more students to each teacher because we're currently teaching in a virtual or remote learning model. But again, we build this budget for success. We build this budget with the assumption that we will be operating in our normal manner next school year. And then how do we do it and provide the best education for our students? And driving up class sizes that's not the answer. That's your last resort. That's what happens when the funding doesn't come, to where we believe it should be and needs to be. And unfortunately, it could be mid-year, and you have to make those tough decisions, which in some regards, Mr. Lenz is right. There are some things in there. We have cut equipment. We have cut utilities over the past few years. And quite frankly, that's how we were explaining about the school supplies and things like that we did for our elementary students in preparation of this school year, and some of our technology. So those things have been cut over the past couple of years, and we continued. We looked at every line for Tier 1 that was not program related or would not have a visible effect on what we offer our students. So all that being said, yes, absolutely. There are some of those positions. Those are obviously the first ones you look at when you have a retirement. For example, you have a phys ed. We have a phys ed retirement. We looked at the numbers not just per building. We looked at it as a district, okay? And we looked at all the numbers. What does it look like if the high school were to cut 2 sections? I'm just giving a for example. If they were to cut 2 sections, what do the class sizes go to in those remaining periods? And then if ASK were to cut 2 sections, well, we're at 4 periods. We're almost at a full-time employee level. So that's the level of breakdown that we did to see what's possible. So yes, you could get to the point where you don't fulfill some of those positions in this current budget, Tier 1. Those positions were filled with step 1. Okay. All right. What is the cost of summer school, the total cost? So it's a combination of general fund monies and also some of the title monies. But Mr. Lenz, you want to give a breakdown of what the K-12 programming would be? Not inclusive of like school counselor days and things like that, this summer school, or Mr. Canaleone.
Yeah, so ultimately, summer school overall, not including some of the transportation, is it's actually, so it's about $190,000 is what it amounts to as far as the instructional component of all of the aspects of summer school. So, and that includes some of the non-instructional staff as well. So it's not a huge portion of the budget, but certainly has a huge impact on the student learning process. But that is the answer to that. And then do we have plans in the future to rebuild our fund balance? That's certainly always something to be mindful of. I certainly am trying to be mindful of that as we build the budget, and as I certainly cut lines and tighten that budget. That is something that I'm very much aware of, because as you tighten lines, it's going to be harder to produce fund balance. But it is certainly still part of the budget process, and certainly we'll have to pay attention to expenses throughout all of next year, not just even for the purpose of building fund balance, but also for the purpose of trying to deal with those look back periods and that potential of mid-year cuts. That's one of the things, just as an example, we asked the administration to be mindful of even just supply orders. In one sense, it sounds a little ridiculous, but in another, before you go ordering $450 worth of supplies, could you get away with only ordering $200 worth of supplies? And if you do that multiple times over, before you know it, you found $50,000. And so, you avoid cutting potentially a person because of being cognizant of those expenses right from the get-go of the school year. So it's that, so if we don't have to have an impact at the end, in the middle of the year, then that would produce fund balance. And so it's making all of those decisions throughout the year and relooking at, the current condition of equipment. Again, you may have a proposal to replace something, but could we make that piece of equipment last another year by potentially spending $2,000 on that piece of equipment and getting it repaired? And so instead of buying a new piece of equipment for 20, it's making all of those decisions all the time, trying to make sure that we have the best, equipment and supplies for our students, and providing them the best conditions to be able to learn in.
Yeah, and to touch upon what Joe just said, about 30,000 is allocated for enrichment programs, stream, music, etc. Answer Tanya's question.
Yeah, so that's the enrichment program that we've been building up over the past couple of years, and this serves a lot of students each summer, and creates that again, that hub of the school in the community, and being central to what the students do. Yeah, go ahead. Next.
And something essential to the summer program was the addition of 6 special education teachers. That was widely popular. That was had a great numbers. And one of the most important things that if we are if there is a summer program, with more guidance from the governor, I think in all these programs that there's going to be a need for, that connection and support that our students aren't seeing during, this closure in live, if we can do that.
Exactly. So, Brian, I think we answered your question, correct?
No, the 4.6, are we, hang on.
So just to go back to that, then ultimately, no. What would happen is we wouldn't have to touch what currently is in fund balance, because this year's budget would be able to. At the end of this year, we're going to have fund balance that would be able to then roll into next year's budget, therefore leaving the current amount definitely intact.
And then Debbie was talking about the implications of the building project. Is that going to hurt the building project, going forward?
No, because the money that I'm talking about as far as fund balance is separate and distinct from the money that we allocated in that building project. And so those funds exist still as well, fully in this plan. There's no impact to those funds.
And okay, so that answered that question. Debbie asked about the future building plan. Tanya Parker Hughes, have there been any additional retirements than we know of already? No, we sent out that information earlier today, and we wanted to make sure that we had everything prepared for that. that window closes at the close of business next Monday. So we'll know then, and that will give us some time to pivot. And also, as we come into that workshop, it will give us an idea of any numbers, recognizing that it's, it doesn't go from the full salary to zero, right? You are replacing a person, or you make the decision of not to. So, Brian, there's no substitute for teachers teaching in the classroom. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no one could debate that. And also, another statement, but yes, we agree with you 100%, Brian, that there's nothing replaces the teacher in the classroom. So appreciate the sense of humor. On the second comment, that is.
I got you.
Any other insight or questions or comments? I mean, so we can get breakdowns of the past 2 years of all the line items, not just for Joan who requested, what does the budget look like in this tier one? We can get that out, folks. Is there any other information that you need from us to help with the conversation this week?
Well, I think, Mike, my question is, do you need anything else from us to move forward? Because we're going to meet again next week. So do we have a number we're comfortable? I don't know. I don't know that I have a number that I'm comfortable with, or that anybody's comfortable with. None of us want to see the taxes go up, but I think we all know that's going to happen somehow. And I think there's going to end up being some impact to educational program, whether we like it or not, somehow. I don't know that anybody is. Are you guys comfortable with looking at your next step and what your next presentation is going to be? Do you think you've gotten enough feedback from us? I don't want to leave you guys hanging trying to figure it out and then coming back next week and saying, well, we couldn't do anything because you didn't give us enough direction. So that's just my concern, I think. Anyone else?
Not to be redundant, but again, if you ask the question, I'll give you the answer. No, we didn't get the feedback that we were hoping for tonight. We want more feedback from you because, again, we know what the tiers look like. We know what, where we prioritized different areas that cuts would come in, and none of them are what we want, right? What we want is our programming. So when I say we selected things, each one was, I can't tell you the decision, right? That it is, but
I see you, Tanya.
That's what we do is we have to make decisions. But so Tanya, the tiers are based on what the cut is. So if the board says we need you to cut $1 million from this budget, then we will tell you what we're proposing would be cut from the budget. So what we need is, we need feedback from the board as to what is it that where are you looking for us to be at this point? We gave the numbers as it stands with the current programming. Again, it's not perfect. It doesn't mean that everything just rolled over, but and it also gives perspective of what we would need to get there based on the funding when you take out state and federal funding, et cetera, but the local component. So fund balance A and tax levy B.
So there's no determined tiers already, because maybe I misunderstood. I thought my understanding at the beginning of your presentation was that you guys already had predetermined tiers.
Correct. We do. What we have is what different programs and what different salaries, what that would do to the budget if we took them off, right? So when you say it's tiered like that, then the most aggressive tier would be as if the governor's statement was 100% accurate and that 20% of funding gets cut. That one's not perfectly done because basically it's the concept of everything is cut, right? And It's really just trying, how do you get to that number of over $6 million? But we need to know if the board is coming out saying we want to see what a $500,000 cut looks like.
Yeah,
sure, we can give you that. We can give you that right away.
I would like to see that.
Me too.
I want the numbers. That's what we're asking for. When you asked me, did we get the feedback we wanted? No, because again, this was my decision, not Mr. Lenz or Mr. Leone. I said, let's go out, because this has to be done in a relatively quick turnaround period because of the timeline and how everything works out. Let's show, without any sort of prejudice, let's show what the budget looks like, maintaining current programming, and then how do we get there in a balance between fund balance and tax levy increase, right? Because either one could be higher on this, but where's the balance? And then when you take in the fact that, aid won't be flowing in certain areas next year, but we're having a surplus in other areas this year, that's where the fund balance made more sense, instead of going where, we all see in the papers, right? When different school districts are doing their presentations, you see school districts going out with a 2.8% tax levy increase. Quite frankly, getting to know the board the way I did over the past couple of years, I wouldn't even come out with that as the rollover, because it's just so far from where we would end up that why would we? Right? So yeah, something with a 1 before it made a lot more sense than something with a 2. I'm not being tongue in cheek, but that's where I wanted to come out tonight, hoping if I explain that, we explain that, and all the other parameters, we then get some feedback of saying, okay, we're not comfortable with that number. We want to see this. And
so are we, I guess the question I'll ask then, since I heard a number thrown out there, are we comfortable with asking them to tell us what a $500,000 cut looks like? Because that's going to, $500,000, you said 260,000, give or take, is 1%. So that's 2%.
286,000.
So that's a little under 2% reduction in the current budget, right? Or am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
It would be,
or is that the tax levy?
Basically, as a board, we would look at where are we going to, what would that impact the allocation from? Would it be, would it take X percent from the tax levy, or would it reduce the amount of fund balance allocation in order to balance the budget? So those are the questions that would be the subsequent answer.
Okay. So is the board comfortable with a number of $500,000 to see what that looks like, and then we have something to work off of?
Yes.
Whether that's too drastic or whether it's not enough.
I don't think it's too drastic. I don't think it's too drastic. I'd be interested even possibly in a little bit more, but that's just me.
Well, what number are you saying, Tanya?
I would say 750 to $1 million, but that's also excessive. So I'm trying to be reasonable in that sense too. So.
Well, I think, honestly, if the board wants to, we don't have a lot of time here, like they said. So do we want to see a scenario next Monday that this is what a $500,000 would look like? This is what $750,000 would look like. And this is what $1 million. But the problem with that is you got to realize the sensitivity on the other end of it, of those numbers, correct? So we put out there, we're going to cut 25%, and I'm just throwing that number out there.
It's true, but it also, like Kayla's comment was, it's kind of also one of those situations where you're talking about a set X amount of dollars. What is the give and to take for that? You know what I mean? So you might say, oh yes, this might save us $100,000, but what we're losing from it isn't worth that $100,000, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I understand.
That's why it's nice. That's why I think to me, it's more important to see a couple of ranges as opposed to just 500 and that's it. I would rather see
in the essence of time.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. In the essence of time, because we're not going to have time. So if people are thinking that potentially a $500,000 is not enough, I'd rather give them marching orders that says, come out to us and show us, what does a $500,000 look like? What does 3/4? What does $1 million look like? And then we say, wait a minute. We're going to have to promote this. This is going to drastically impact our program overall. This is not fair to our kids. And then we promote what we feel is the best thing. But, I asked that question because I really didn't think we gave them
anything to work off of. So, is the board comfortable? Is the administration comfortable coming back to us with those three numbers? I mean, not that you have a choice because we're giving you marching orders, but I just kind of would like to know, are we asking too much from you to come up with these numbers? Because, realistically, think about it. If he comes out on May 15th, right, 3 days before that and says, we're cutting you 10%, that number's changing a hell of a lot more than we've given you marching orders for, right? So, and I'm sure you've worked out those what if scenarios down the road, but you're just not, at this point, we don't need to share that. So, I mean, that's just my feeling.
Yeah. And we're pretty much ready to go if those are the actual increments. I chose a little different based on different concepts of like a % of tax levy increase, that type of thing, because we weren't sure where some of the numbers were going to land, but nonetheless, they could be easily adjusted to reflect what, going from 570,000 or whatever it was to 500,000 is easy. I can show what a clean $500,000 or as close to a clean $500,000 looks like. But I will tell you that even as you look at that as the tier 2, if you want to call it that, it's impacting things. It's $500,000 is a lot of money.
A huge number.
And you are talking positions, and I will tell you that the positions provide a value to our students and the learning community. I'm not naive to the fact that we need to be very cognizant of the financial aspect, and I think I've proven myself to be very conservative in that regard. However, I'm telling you that 500,000, you're going to see some deep cuts in certain areas.
So
you're going to see deep.
Would it be unthinkable then to maybe ask, not for such a big tier, maybe start at
250?
Yeah, 250, 350, you know what I mean? Not to go up as high as that, because we certainly, I don't think anybody in this board wants to give anybody marching orders in our in this district.
Well, I don't want to hurt that. My bottom line is we have to ensure that we're delivering a program that's educationally sound for our students to the best of our ability financially. And, that's across the board, whether you're special ed, general ed, or what you are. Right. They didn't ask to be born, and we have to educate them. And, I've said that for all the years I've sat on a board. So,
not go so
we all have to cut our belts, but we got to do it in the essence of doing what's right for the education of our future.
We just have to also be cognizant of the fact that 20% of the population is unemployed.
No, I understand that, Brian. Believe me, I get it.
Yep.
I was fortunate enough to be called back to work. Flo?
Yes, I just like to say, I understand what everybody's saying and stuff, and I understand what Mr. Rydell is saying about positions and the cuts and everything else. And I understand about the children and the students that are learning in the learning community, but you've got to understand that it's not only a school district that's going to be affected by this. In fact, it's the towns and the cities that are around you. So not only getting impacted with a school, we are definitely, without a doubt, getting impacted by a city and a town, because they're not going to get their funding and their finance the way they always did for all these years. So it's,
absolutely.
I understand, but if you take a position away, you know what? Someone had said it before. Something's got to give somewhere. And you can't keep going after the taxpayer and the person who's losing their home, or the person who this has got to be. You want to take care of these kids. Yeah, we're going to take care of these kids, but we got to understand all the other aspects of it. And I understand about the busing, but you know what? It's a wash. So you're going to be in the same boat next year, no matter which way you play it. Play around with the numbers, but it's going to be the same place. And I think now we got to really put the nose to the grind to find out what we can and cannot do to survive this, because it's going to be a 4-year, 45-year epic. What we're doing.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misrepresented that I was not cognizant of the adverse impact on families or taxpayers. I want to stress, and I want to make sure that this is abundantly clear. Tonight was to provide the board with where the jumping off point is based on current programming. I don't want it to be misrepresented that I was saying that this is what we want to go out with.
Right.
It is the programming we want. I'm not going to shy away from that. But we need to know from the board some of the direction, because ultimately the board adopts the budget, and we'll do everything it takes to advocate for the programs that our students deserve and that we need. But then we'll also look at every way we can to fund those things that we want to do. But that being said, that's what the purpose of tonight was to get that direction so we can fine tune it. We've done the research. That's why I'm saying we could have a budget workshop tomorrow night with those numbers and do that. But we needed some of that direction. Joan?
The last thing I want is to have anything negatively, that didn't come out right, affect the students. I would like you first to look at any type of salaries. Like when I say stipends, I mean the secondary wages that some of the employees are getting. And I hate to say this to you, gentlemen, but also your salaries for next year. Any other employees that get any kind of raises that are not contractually, that we don't have to give you raises. I want you to look at those first, and any kind of equipment, like I said, that we don't need. Anything that you can do without impacting the students first, and see what kind of money you can come up with that way.
Okay.
I certainly I understand exactly what you're saying. I just can't stress enough that I think this is a very different budgetary process this year than any other. And our typical process of going through the budget, I actually have to say I'm very concerned about because, again, we could have mid-year impacts that basically the governor has pretty much told us is a possibility. And so, the more we cut now, and I certainly understand the aspect of that, but the aid number is potentially going to go down from there, which means that we're going to make further cuts possibly in the same school year. And then, once you make those cuts, they're cut. You're not going to save that money again. So when we make next year's budget and we're in a financial hardship again, it's going to be, on top of that. And we're a school district. We're staffing. At the end of the day, that's where much of the cuts come from. And believe me, Joan, I understand, and I know you understand. We can certainly, make decisions about equipment. It's just like having, an older car. At the end of the day, would you like the newer vehicle? Can you limp along with the older car? But there does reach a point where the older car either doesn't run any longer and it doesn't make any sense to keep those. So it's all of those things that we have to be cognizant of and making decisions that ensure student safety and so on and so forth. And there's other lines, again, I have to stress is that some of the things that I would have went to as far as the materials and supplies, we can't touch right now because we, like I said before, have purchased between $40,000 and $50,000 of additional cleaning supplies that we're going to continue to have to do so, as well as, we're trying to figure out the PPE business and are we going to have to provide those to students? So I'm going to have funds necessary to do that, for example. So it's things that we're unaware of and we need to plan for the unknowns, which we always have to do, but it's really almost like having unfunded mandates to ensure everybody's safety. So there are going to have to be funds set aside for things that we sort of know right now, because we really don't know what September is going to look like.
Yeah, because you three gentlemen have done so much to improve the academics and the co-curricular of the students. I really hate to see that go backwards.
And it will. Yeah, it's, you know, with any cut, when you get to the $500,000 level, that's certainly the first programmatic things that get cut. It's just the way it is. I also want to just add to what Mr. Lenz was saying. You know, we do have to also prepare for so many unknowns. This budget vote, for example, is an unknown. We weren't sure as to what the governor was going to say was the mechanism for voting, and how that was going to look like. And now we have an anticipated bill for the postage and the materials that's going to exceed $20,000.
Right.
And I mean, that wasn't per se in the budget, right? We didn't budget for what happens if we have to mail home ballots to every registered voter in our district. So those are things, and we, you know, we still don't know what the guidance will be for September. If there's some sort of return to school, what type of materials do we have to have in our buildings in order to ensure compliance? So those are things we have to build in. And the last piece on that topic that I'll cover is just, you know, food for thought, and to really stress it. If it's determined that we need to cut X amount of dollars at the midpoint of next year, and the only places for that are in staffing, you know, among other places that we haven't already, you know, turned those over, you have to also comprehend that you've also paid those individuals for half the year. So what may have been 3 staffing cuts turns into 6 in order to bridge that gap, because again, that's when the look back period is.
Right.
That makes sense if I articulated that correctly or clearly, but it's an important thing to note in the pre-season part of, you know, what you start versus, you know, what you don't start. Any questions on that, or Debbie, you're on mute.
Yep.
Debbie, you're still on mute.
She says, I know. She's trying to fix it.
There you go.
You can read the lips.
You're really good at lip reading. Kayla had made a comment. I responded, and then she had another comment. Did you want to address that comment, Mike? Or Joe, whomever?
Thanks, Joe. Oh. Yeah. So Kayla says, I feel like the acceptable number needs to be also based on what the cuts would be, weighing the options completely. It's important to know what we're getting or not getting for X amount of money. Yeah, absolutely. That's where the tiers come in. Absolutely. Yep. Great point. Great way of putting it. And then Debbie responded, the board should be setting parameters and asking what they look like. And, you know, certainly, you know, no one's asking to, I don't think anyone's dictating what the cuts will be, but what do the cuts look like? What is, you know, it's a very good point. And you know, Judy, you were making it, what does 250,000 look like? And then, you know, then the $500,000, et cetera. So yeah, we can absolutely do that.
Okay.
And then from there, you can look at the other line items and you say, okay, well, I see you put that on there based on the priority list. Why didn't you look at this? And, you know, we can have that conversation and then figure that part out.
Okay. Flo?
Are we going to get documentation by the next meeting to look over, to have questions? And
yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I'm good.
Anyone else? No?
And I think, and if Mr. Vidal, you could correct me, any questions, we call you, the administration at Thompson Street, just to get clarification, so we know what we're talking about, if we need some help or guidance. Right?
I feel that we're relatively responsive, relatively good at responding to you in a timely manner.
Well, thanks for your hard work on this. I know it's not easy. It's got to be very frustrating when you're here trying to put plans together to do the best we can for our kids. And then
And we don't
have outside things that are happening and we have no guidance as to where we're going. So you're driving a bus down a blind highway with blinders on. I get it. I don't like it any more than you guys do. So we're here to support you and do what we can for our kids and try to save what we can for our taxpayers. Anybody else?
Absolutely. And it's not just the three of us, working at Thompson Street, right? We have a great team down here, and I'm not trying to be cliche, but the building administrators are involved with this, CSCA, PJTA. This is everyone, and it's all hands on deck. It's a unique time, and nothing is done in isolation. And no one's just looking at the budget in isolation and not having those conversations. And so if nothing else comes out of this awful experience of the pandemic, it's the power of collaboration and communication.
Linda?
I would just like to say thank you to you all, because I know you guys have been working really hard, and I'm another visual person, so having the numbers in front of me will help a lot for the next meeting. And I do appreciate all you've been doing, so, and the teams that you're working with at work as well. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. And I guess that's it, unless you have questions as we receive our information or specific things you come up with over the week that you're concerned about, which we can refer to administration, and we'll see each other here again next week.
So we'll send out various documents that were directly or indirectly requested tonight.
Okay.
And, anything that has to do with staffing or particular positions, that will wait till the workshop.
Okay. Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye,
everybody.
You too.
Bye.